late 1944. Deep in the Owl Mountains of Silesia, the earth began to tremble. Villagers heard explosions that seemed to come from inside the mountains. Themselves, not above, but beneath. Every night, the sky flickered with dull orange light as trainloads of cement, steel, and men vanished into the woods. None of them came back. The locals gave the place a name they whispered only in private. Der Riese, the giant. They said the mountain was alive, that it was eating men. Prisoners from across Europe were marched into the forest in convoys guarded by SS soldiers. Thousands went underground through freshly blasted tunnels and simply disappeared. The locals were told to stay silent. Rumors spread of an underground fortress big enough to survive any bombing, a bunker for the entire Reich. Others swore it was a factory for a weapon, so advanced that even Hitler himself was terrified of it. But the truth was buried deeper than anyone imagined. Literally. Because inside those mountains, Germany was building something no Allied spy had ever seen. A network so vast that if it had been finished, the course of the war might have looked very different. And it all began with a mountain that refused to let its secrets go. By the winter of 1944, the Allies ruled the skies. From London to Berlin, not a factory or rail yard could hide from their bombers. But somehow, deep in the Owl Mountains, entire trainloads of supplies were disappearing, and no one could explain where they were going. Reconnaissance planes photographed endless forests, quiet villages, and rocky slopes. Nothing more. No surface construction, no smoke, no machinery. And yet every night, Allied listening stations picked up distant tremors, the rhythmic thud of underground explosions. Something massive was being built. Local farmers spoke of new roads leading nowhere, guarded by men in black uniforms. Trucks entered the woods at dusk and didn't return until dawn. The air smelled of diesel and wet stone. Then came the whispers. Der Riese wasn't a single site. It was seven separate tunnel complexes buried beneath the mountains, connected by rail lines and ventilation shafts, an underground world no map recorded, expanding silently while the war above was collapsing. The British called it Project Giant. The Germans called it Top Secret, Führer Priority One. And whatever it was swallowing more than materials. It was swallowing time. Every day it continued unseen, was another day closer to whatever nightmare Germany was preparing to unleash beneath the earth. The idea for Projekt Riese, Project Giant, was born in late 1943, when Hitler finally realized what his generals had been too afraid to say aloud. Germany was losing the war. Allied bombers had turned the Reich's industrial heartland into ash. Armament factories in Essen, Kassel, and Hamburg were flattened night after night. If Germany wanted to keep building weapons, it had to go underground, literally. So the task fell to the one man who could make the impossible happen. SS General Hans Kammler. Kammler was no ordinary bureaucrat. He was the engineer behind Auschwitz's gas chambers and the V-2 rocket program, a man with the technical genius of Werner von Braun and the cold efficiency of a machine. In the autumn of 1943, Kammler proposed a new idea directly to Hitler, a self-sustaining underground complex, large enough to house entire factories, laboratories, and command centers safe from Allied bombs. Hitler approved it immediately. No paperwork, no oversight, just a single order. Build it, whatever it takes. And so, deep in the mountains of Lower Silesia, construction began on a network of tunnels that would dwarf anything the Reich had ever attempted. The project had no official name on documents, only a code name, whispered among engineers, Der Riese. Within months, an army of forced laborers and SS guards arrived, armed not with rifles, but with drills, dynamite, and death sentences. The Reich's final fortress had begun to take shape, carved straight into the bones of the earth. The blueprints of Projekt Riese spoke of progress and power, but the reality was horror carved in stone. Tens of thousands of prisoners from across occupied Europe, Poles, Jews, Soviets, Italians, and even French resistance members, were dragged to the Owl Mountains from nearby Gross-Rosen, one of the Reich's most brutal concentration camps. Their orders were simple: dig, blast, and build, until they collapsed. The air inside the tunnels was thick with dust and ammonia from explosives. Men worked 16-hour shifts with no ventilation, no light, and no end. The SS gave them pickaxes, not helmets. The injured were shot. The dead were left where they fell, sometimes sealed into the walls. When new concrete was poured, survivors later said the ground hummed from the constant drilling. Some claimed they hadn't seen sunlight for weeks. Kammler called them disposable labor units. To him, they weren't building a mountain. They were building history. By early 1945, estimates say between 5,000 and 10,000 men had died inside Der Riese. Their bodies were never properly counted, and to this day, many of their names remain unknown. The project was swallowing more than stone and steel. It was swallowing souls. And the deeper the tunnels went, the more desperate the Reich became to finish them. No matter how many lives it cost, even the engineers working inside, the tunnels couldn't agree on what they were building. Some plans showed barracks, command rooms, and ventilation shafts, perfect for an underground fortress. Others detailed power stations, chemical labs, and heavy cranes designed to lift machinery, not weapons. Rumors spread among prisoners and guards alike. Some said it was Hitler's final headquarters, where the Führer would rule from the safety of stone while the Reich above crumbled. Others believed it was a factory, one designed to mass-produce Germany's secret weapons, jet engines, V-2 rockets, or even something darker. Allied intelligence intercepted chatter about special materials being shipped into the mountains. Tungsten, uranium, mercury. None of these belonged in a normal military bunker. One captured engineer called it a place to build the miracle that would save Germany. But if Der Riese was meant to save the Reich, it was being built far too late. The Red Army was closing in from the east, and American bombers were burning cities from the west. Still, the work continued, even as Germany itself was disintegrating. What exactly were they racing to finish, and why did they believe it could still change the war? By early 1945, Projekt Riese had become a paradox, the Reich's greatest engineering dream, and its biggest failure. Allied armies were closing in from every direction. The thunder of artillery could already be heard from the tunnels, echoing through the stone like a ticking clock. But inside, work continued. Prisoners still dug, engineers still measured, SS guards still shouted for more speed. They were building a city that would never open its doors. At its height, Der Riese stretched for miles, underground. Concrete chambers big, enough to hold aircraft, rail lines, and machinery the size of buildings. Some tunnels were so vast they had their own internal weather, with mist forming where cold air met the heat of generators. But the end came faster than anyone expected. The Red Army was less than 100 kilometers away. Kammler ordered the entrances sealed. Explosives were set to destroy evidence. But many detonations never happened, either sabotaged by prisoners or abandoned in the chaos. Within weeks, the mountain fell silent. The war ended, but Projekt Riese did not. It simply stopped. Half completed, half buried, and wholly unexplained. When the Allies arrived, they found tools still on the floor, food still on the tables, and machines that had never been turned on. It was as if the workers had vanished mid-breath, and the mountain had swallowed them whole. May 1945. As the guns finally fell silent, Soviet and Polish troops pushed deep into the Owl Mountains and stumbled upon something they weren't supposed to find. Hidden among the pines were concrete bunkers, rusted rails and blast doors built into the cliffs. When engineers pried them open, what they saw defied imagination. Behind the entrances stretched miles of tunnels carved into solid granite. Some chambers were the size of cathedrals, with ceilings so high the soldiers' flashlights couldn't reach them. Steel pillars stood like ribs inside the earth, supporting caverns big enough to fit aircraft or entire train cars. The deeper they went, the stranger it became. They found unfinished walls covered in chalk, markings, engineering notes, written in German, piles of cables, ventilation shafts, and the remains of elevators that led even further down. But there were no machines, no records, and no workers. One Soviet report described it simply: a city beneath the mountains, built for a purpose unknown. American intelligence arrived weeks later and sealed the area off. Photographs were classified. Maps disappeared. The Allies realized they hadn't just uncovered a bunker. They'd uncovered an entire world, an underground empire that had been growing while Germany was dying. And the deeper they dug, the less sense it made. When the war ended, Projekt Riese should have been just another abandoned bunker. Instead, it became an obsession. The Allies refused to release what they found inside. Soviet engineers sealed several entrances. American and British teams photographed every tunnel, then classified their reports for decades. What could be so dangerous about a half-finished construction site? That silence gave birth to legend. Some believed Der Riese was part of Germany's atomic program, a hidden research center for uranium enrichment. Others claimed it was connected to the V2 rocket project, where scientists experimented with propulsion, systems far beyond the technology of the time. But the strangest theory of all came years later. Die Glocke, the bell. According to post-war testimonies, Kammler oversaw a mysterious, bell-shaped device that glowed purple when powered on, rumored to bend gravity itself. Some say it was tested inside Der Riese's deepest tunnels. No one ever proved it existed, but no one could prove it didn't either. And then there was Kammler himself, the man who knew everything. He vanished in May 1945. No body, no documents, no trial, not a single confirmed sighting. Whatever Der Riese was meant to be, the only man who could explain it disappeared along with its purpose. And that's when history turned into a myth. By the 1950s, Projekt Riese had vanished from public record. Officially, it was a failed Nazi construction site. Unofficially, both superpowers were still very interested. American intelligence files later revealed that U.S. agents had revisited the Owl Mountains multiple times under the guise of post-war cleanup. Locals remembered military trucks with no markings entering the forest at night, and leaving hours later, covered in dust. Meanwhile, the Soviets claimed the area was dangerous and sealed. Several entrances with concrete. Polish residents were warned not to dig, not to explore, and not to ask questions. But satellite images decades later told a different story. Newly cut roads, ventilation shafts reopened, even signs of excavation, all appearing in the 1960s, at the height of the Cold War. Some historians believe the Soviets stripped Der Riese of anything usable, machinery, prototypes, even experimental power, systems left behind by the SS. Others argue the Americans beat them to it, moving key components to secret facilities in New Mexico and Nevada. Both sides denied everything. But one thing was undeniable. After 1945, Der Riese never truly slept. It simply changed hands, and its tunnels, once filled with slave labor, became silent witnesses to a new kind of war. One fought in shadows, secrets, and silence. Beneath all the theories, the secrecy, and the Cold War silence, one truth remains. Der Riese was built on human suffering. In the decades after the war, when researchers finally returned to the tunnels, they found more than machinery. They found bones. Shattered tools still lay beside them. Hammers, picks, shovels, some small enough for a child's hands. Rusted chains hung from steel beams. Prisoner tags stamped with numbers, not names, were found embedded in the concrete. Archaeologists estimate that between 30,000 and 40 prisoners passed through the site during its construction. Many never left. Survivors who lived long enough to tell their stories remembered one sound above all: the drilling. It never stopped. Not for air raids, not for death. The ground itself seemed to hum, as if the mountain demanded more lives to keep growing. There were no graves. The bodies of the dead were buried within the walls they built, sealed inside the very tunnels that became their tomb. Today, flowers and memorial plaques mark some entrances, but most of the names are still unknown. For every mystery about Der Riese's purpose, there is one certainty. Its foundation wasn't steel or concrete. It was human life, and the mountain has never stopped keeping their silence. Half a century after the war, the Owl Mountains were still keeping secrets. In the 1990s, as Poland reopened to the world, explorers and historians returned to the forest where Der Riese once slept. What they found was like stepping into a time capsule, a frozen world of rusted machinery, twisted cables, and tunnels that looked as if the workers had just stepped away. Whole rail tracks still lined the floors. Elevators hung motionless in empty shafts. Walls were scorched from explosions that had never finished their destruction. Divers sent cameras into the flooded lower levels and found caverns even deeper than expected. Some large enough to hide aircraft or trains. But what unsettled them most were the sealed steel doors. Some stood behind meters of concrete, welded shut from the inside. No one knows what's beyond them. Radiation tests revealed faint traces of unusual isotopes. Not enough to be lethal, but enough to raise new questions. Geologists confirmed that several tunnels continue far beyond the mapped areas, possibly connecting to unknown chambers still untouched. Today, parts of Riese are open as tourist sites, while others remain under strict government control. The Polish authorities insist it's for safety. Collapsing ceilings, unstable ground. But locals still whisper that the government found something and sealed it again. Because not every door in the mountain should be opened twice. Decades have passed, and the world above has moved on. But beneath the soil of the Owl Mountains, Riese still breathes. Its tunnels stretch for miles in every direction, silent now, but intact. Engineers say the concrete walls were poured to last 1,000 years. Some of the steel still gleams untouched by rust, as if time itself hesitated at the threshold. Historians call it a monument to madness, a fortress that was never used, a city that never lived. Yet somehow Projekt Riese achieved exactly what it was meant to. It survived. No bombs could destroy it, no regime could erase it, and no one, not even those who built it, fully understood what it was for. To some, it stands as proof of human ambition at its darkest, how a dying empire tried to build immortality underground. To others, it's a mystery still unsolved, a machine that never woke, waiting in the dark. Tourists visit the site now, walking through the cold tunnels with flashlights, tracing their hands along the rough walls where prisoners once carved marks to count the days. Each mark, a heartbeat. Each tunnel, a grave. The mountain is quiet, but it listens. Because Riese was never just concrete and stone, it was an obsession made solid. And as long as its tunnels remain sealed, the giant will keep dreaming beneath the earth, waiting for someone to ask the one question it was built to hide. What was it really for?